All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to call today's Transportation Committee meeting to order. As a reminder, this meeting is being shared virtually through Zoom for those who couldn't join us in person today and is being recorded. So if committee members could turn on your microphones and announce your name and your organization while speaking, it's helpful for us in the room, but also for those online virtually. I'd like to ask committee members at the table to introduce themselves. I can start. My name is Kevin Carrier, representing Lake County.
Good morning, Tara Orban, representing Cook County.
Amy Lee, CMAP.
Michael Kent, Chicago Department of Transportation.
Kasky, Will County.
Heidi Lichtenberger, Kendall County.
Heidi Files, Kane County.
Karen Robles, Tollway.
Chris Hebert, Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission.
Kyle Whitehead, RTA.
Tom Vanderwood, Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission.
John Paul Diepla, FHWA.
Eric Llewellyn Pace.
Good morning, Leon Rockingham, Mayor of the City of North Chicago, Council of Mayors.
John Loper, DuPage County.
Scott Hennings, McHenry County.
David Kralik, Metro.
Thomas Monty, Metropolitan Planning Council.
Amy Reinell, Active Transportation Alliance.
Steve Schulke, IDOT Region 1.
CTA.
Megan Swanson, IDOT.
Vicki Barrett, CMAP.
All right, thank you, everyone. Moving to item 2, there are no agenda changes. Do we have any announcements from committee members? Seeing none. Moving on to item 3.01. We have before us the draft minutes from our August 1st meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes as presented? Got a motion, Mayor. Do I have a second? Thank you, Amy. Is there any discussion on the minutes as proposed? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4 is the CMAP updates. Amy is here to provide an update on the CMAP news. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back, and it feels like a little bit of welcome back to summer here too. Welcome to the September Transportation Committee meeting. As per usual, I have a few updates about what CMAP's been doing in the region, as well as some upcoming calendar events that you all might want to be aware of. Late last month, Executive Director Erin Alleman welcomed attendees to the 15th National Conference on Transportation Asset Management in Chicago. In her remarks, Erin highlighted Chicago's history as a region built by transportation and emphasized the importance of strong partnerships from local governments to national organizations in coordinating and advancing asset management. Also at the conference, our very own Jose Rodriguez from CMAP joined a national panel on pavement management systems for local municipal agencies. He highlighted CMAP's work helping more than 90 municipalities implement pavement management plans since 2025. Erin also joined the transit community safety workshops that CMAP convened, that CTA convened with regional partners, underscoring the importance of advancing strategies that strengthen transit rider safety. As an update on the county safety action plans, earlier this summer, CMAP completed county safety action plans for 6 counties in our region. We're pleased to share that both Will County and McHenry counties have already adopted their plans. These plans will serve as a critical foundation for advancing safety projects, securing funding, and reducing serious injuries and fatalities on our regional network. And now some calendar events to make you all aware of, looking ahead here. The APA Illinois Conference, that will take place October 8th through 10th here at the old post office. This event brings together planners and partners from across the state. CMAP staff will be featured in 6 sessions covering topics from accessibility and engagement, equitable community partnerships, economic development, transit-oriented development, and workforce opportunity. We encourage you all, everyone here, to consider attending and adding this event to your calendars with exception. To those who need to be at our joint board and MPO policy committee meeting, that is October 8th. It overlaps with the first day of the APA conference. And as you might know, this is the one meeting where the board, CMAP board and MPO meet together. And usually we're located on the second floor, but guess what? APA knocked us out. So we are in the process of looking for a new location. We promise to keep you all posted, but just wanted to flag that for you all as you will be helping us, I'm sure, encourage the members of those committees to attend for that once a year gathering. Something I do want to note about this particular meeting in October is that it will be, the business part of that meeting will be shortened because what we want to do is allocate most of that time to discussion around the development of our next comprehensive plan, which we're calling the Century Plan. Again, we're going to keep that agenda short and dedicate most of our discussion to that, and hoping to get input from the leaders of your organizations. The output will identify major drivers of change and uncertainty in the years ahead. The MPO Policy Committee members are critical to understanding, of course, the grand challenges and opportunities facing our region and our communities. So please make sure, if you could, to prepare your folks for that. And we will, again, stay in touch with you about the location. We do hope to secure a place nearby, so hopefully it won't be a big change. And then related, we are wanting to remind you all about the event, the State of the Region event. That too will be held here at our offices on November 4th. Everyone here, TC members, should have received an invitation to CMAP's first ever State of the Region, celebrating CMAP's 20th anniversary and launching that Century Plan, the public engagement piece of that. We're excited to see you there alongside, we believe, 1,000 regional leaders. So please be sure to RSVP if you haven't already. Usually when we have the board and MPO meet in October, that means that we don't meet in October. So our next meeting is scheduled for Friday, November 12th. With that, I'll return things to you, Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Moving on to item 5. I'm just talking slow so Russell can get up to the podium. Russell is with us this morning. He's going to provide an overview of the fiscal year 2023-2028 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Good morning, Russell.
All right, thank you. This is the final tip changes for FFY 2025, and it's also the last one being done in the current eTIP platform. So for those who make tip changes, you can say goodbye to how it looks, and we've been offering lots of training over the last couple of weeks, and we will continue to offer more training on the new platform, but things will look a lot different moving forward. While the new platform will look very different and have a lot more functionality procedurally wise, we are not making any changes to what is a formal amendment or an administrative amendment. All of that is staying the same. We are just updating our platform and adding increased functionality and making it a little more Windows and user-friendly. However, as we anticipate having less administrative amendments in the future, some things that require amendments now will not require amendments in the future, such as updating a target letting date, something like that, that really can just be done by editing the project. That's the future. In the present, including in your packet today, are the 59 formal tip changes shown on Amendment 25-11 and the 123 tip changes shown on Administrative Amendments 25-11.1 and 25-11.2. Formal amendments resulted in an increase of $255.9 million in total project costs for all prior, future, and current years. Couple highlights, and really it's only going to be primarily one highlight. At the last Transportation Committee meeting, the RTA presented their FTA Section 5310 program of projects. This funding is designated to improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. The project being entered into the TIP today is a variety of projects throughout the region that use these funds, such as Ride and Cane, Ride and Lake, McRide, Will County Dollar Ride, several nonprofits. It also includes funds for transportation in Kendall County, and new this year, a portion of Grundy County that is in the CMAP region. I know several committee members are very well aware of the very tangible benefits that these funds have in our region. And this is one of the few projects that actually funds operating and capital. And those funds are distributed throughout the region through RTA's call for projects. And it directly provides rides to individuals that are seniors or people with disabilities throughout our region. Without these funds, a lot of these folks would not have access to transportation. The other project that I want to highlight may not be the most glamorous project either. It's an IDOT project. IDOT is adding $13 million to do shoulder work, repair rumble strips, and address drainage on US 14 in McHenry County, all of which will improve safety. I know safety is an important priority for the region. Sometimes those projects are not the sexy projects per se, but they are the ones that actually make a tangible difference on people's commute and their ability to drive on the road. Administrative amendments added $72 million to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. The net change for total costs in the TIP from all amendments resulted in $327.9 million being added to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. Projects with phases moving into and out of the active TIP years and new projects comprised most of the formal changes, while administrative amendments were primarily related to costs below the thresholds, schedule, and AC and ACC changes. Accounting for the amendments presented to you today, the TIP remains fiscally constrained. The amendments were posted on September 5th for committee and public review. Approval of formal TIP Amendment 25-11 is requested, and after the motion has been made, I can answer any questions if there are any at that time.
All right, thank you, Russell. I will entertain a motion to approve TIP Amendment 25-11.
So moved. Heidi Files.
Ready? Do I have a second?
Carol Orban, second.
Thank you, Tara. All right, any questions or discussion on that item? None? All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Great. Thank you, Russell. Appreciate it. All right, moving along and moving on to informational items. Item 6.01, our friends from the Regional Transportation Plan team are back to share more progress with us. Ryan Tomto will tell us about the summer engagement work and the Regional Capital Projects Benefits Report. Elizabeth Ginsburg will update on the financial plan, and Eric Kempel will tell us about the policy work conducted on intercity bus and rail. Good morning.
Morning, thank you. Again, my name is Ryan Tomto, Principal Policy Analyst here at CMAP. I use he, him pronouns. Here to provide an update on the Regional Transportation Plan. Work is unfolding or continues to unfold across multiple streams with multiple partners contributing to this work. As was mentioned, today's update is going to focus on some key takeaways from public outreach that has occurred to date. Then I'll provide an overview of the draft RCP benefits report that was recently posted to our website and included in the agenda. Then I'll hand it over to my colleague, Elizabeth Ginsburg, who will walk us through the draft expenditure forecast for the financial plan. And then again, we have Eric Kempel from Eric Kempel ITC, who will share some initial insights from the intercity bus and rail policy brief that is currently being developed. So on the next slide, it's a slide I think you all are familiar with, overall timeline of the process to develop the RTP. Staff and partners are advancing analysis, policy development, and project evaluations across simultaneous tracks. Resource groups have been engaged throughout in providing input and expertise that help shape this work. And just a reminder, the draft plan is targeted for release in June 2026 for public review, with the aim of having it taken to the board and MPO for consideration in October of 2026. So looking at public engagement, we had robust public outreach activities happening over the summer, and they will continue to go into through the fall. But just want to share some kind of milestone check-in on where we're at with that. So far, we've reached an estimated 36,000 people through digital channels, events, and targeted outreach. Over the summer, we connected with residents and communities across all 7 counties of the region, where we heard about people's transportation experiences, challenges, and hopes for the future. Based on these conversations, in the 1,500 responses we've received so far through the questionnaire, some key themes have emerged. The biggest transportation challenges residents have identified are vehicle speeding, road congestion, and access to transit. People would prefer to see increased investment in infrastructure that supports transit, walking, and biking. Residents commonly make travel decisions based on safety, reliability, and especially for transit, frequency of service. And outside of providing transportation options, members of the public want to see the system help promote community and economic development, the protection of environmental resources, and resilience to extreme weather events. Looking forward, the invaluable input that will work in concert with the ongoing research, data analysis, and stakeholder engagement to shape RTP strategies. So again, we have more public outreach events planned throughout the fall, and the questionnaire will remain open through the end of the calendar year. Also just want to have a reminder about the current phase of work we're in for strategy development. This includes multiple efforts that are now underway to identify and refine strategies for inclusion in the RTP. We're building on the foundation laid in the 2022 onto 2050 update and drawing from recent planning efforts, including efforts shown on the screen here, such as mobility recovery, the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, the Speed Management Paper, Transit is the Answer, and others. We're also incorporating strategies from in-progress efforts like the Climate Action Plan, the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, as well as congestion management strategies and others. And also, as we have Eric here today, we've engaged our consultant team to support strategy development through a series of policy briefs to fill in kind of some of those gaps that we have from previous and work underway. And so this includes what we talked about at the last meeting, which is transportation asset management. Today's focus will be on the intercity bus and rail. And then we also have work for emerging technology and innovative finance and project delivery underway. We also have the reasonably expected revenues series of policy briefs that are also being developed with CDM Smith. One of those briefs is also posted and linked in the agenda today. So I'll pause there just if there's any questions about overall progress in the process before I move over to the RCP benefits report. Good. Great. Okay, so the purpose of this report. This report provides the evaluation results of the region's major transportation capital projects. So these are the projects that meet the definition and thresholds that were established last year. This report is essentially a tool for understanding the potential benefits and trade-offs of the projects. The report is not the final selection of projects. Instead, it provides data and analysis that will inform future discussions about which projects are prioritized for inclusion in the fiscally constrained plan. The RCP process is a critical building block of the 2026 RTP, which must demonstrate that planned investments are both necessary and fiscally achievable through 2050. This draft shows how candidate projects perform across 11 evaluation categories that we worked with the resource group to develop. The analysis helps align project priorities with regional goals and ensures CMAP can demonstrate air quality conformity and fiscal responsibility as required by federal law. So in terms of this draft report, I want to emphasize that this is a draft version of the report. It is designed to share initial results with the committee and partners while CMAP continues to refine the analysis. The draft nature means that updates and corrections are possible as we continue through the process. As such, I want to note that through this analysis, we did find an error in the air quality emissions numbers in the report, and so that has been updated and is now on the website. So not the one that was included with the agenda has been updated since and posted and is available today. It was results in a slight increase in the emissions from the projects. Minimal, but worth noting that it did change, especially when you think about it cumulatively. So wanted to note that. I also want to emphasize that working with the resource group, CMAP identified 137 regional capital projects total, representing more than $80 billion in costs through 2050. These include capacity projects, financially significant investments, and sponsor-nominated projects. These included the 23 projects that already have committed funding. So those are the projects that might not have been constructed yet, but they are fully funded. And so those did not go through an evaluation process and are instead in the report noted as committed. It's important to note that if at any point those projects are no longer fully funded, they will likely have to go through an amendment process to make changes, just to make sure that we have an updated analysis of them. And so let's see here. Also want to note that 7 projects add lanes to the interstate system, totaling 166 new lane miles. 37 projects construct new arterials or add lanes to existing arterials, which total 331 new lane miles. And then 13 new transit lines or extensions are included. But it's important to note that 7 of those are considered conceptual or visionary kind of projects. And so it's not anticipated that those will be included on the constrained list. So here on the next slide, we have, before I get into the actual evaluation results, want to remind us of the timeline. So after we worked with the resource group to update the definition and thresholds last year, we worked to start collecting project information and finalize evaluation criteria to evaluate those projects. This report represents the completion of that evaluation. And once we have, we're going to go through and have a discussion about the reasonably expected revenues, or sorry, yeah, the expenditure forecast, which helps us start landing on a place of what we have in terms of available funding in the conversation around whether we have enough revenues to cover the expenditures. And based off of that, we'll likely have to go into a prioritization process to determine what makes it onto the constrained list versus what goes on the unconstrained list, as well as going through the process to prioritize the constrained list for those projects that rise to kind of like a priority project level, which I'll get into here in a minute. Also on this side, I just want to take a moment to, again, thank the resource group members who have been participating through this. We have had, I think we're at 9 meetings now over the past 2 years. We have a total of 33 representatives from 16 organizations from across the region. And just want to note that we're going to continue to work with this resource group as we move to the next steps of prioritizing projects. So for the evaluation categories, the evaluation of projects builds on the process used for Onto 2050, but for this cycle, we introduced streamlined measures for transparency and usability. Some of those key updates included reduced and refined set of measures focused on things like reliability, safety, emissions, et cetera. Future impacts, roadway mobility, transit mobility, emissions and infill development support, as well as financial costs, including capital operations and maintenance. So some of the key findings from this work. All of the future impact measures are region-wide measures. Thus, something like that shows up in the report as a 1% impact is fairly substantial and about the biggest we get from any one project in the report. Wanted to note that for roadway mobility, I-55 managed lanes, DeSable Lakeshore Drive, and I-90 O'Hare access improvements are projected to deliver major delay reductions for passenger vehicles. For transit mobility, core transit capacity and modernization projects show that it will result in faster transit travel times and significantly increased ridership. In terms of emissions, several highway projects reduce delay, which does provide some emissions benefits. But as we'd expect, transit projects do show stronger region-wide benefits in greenhouse gas and ozone pollutant reductions. For infill support, it's noteworthy that BRT and transit modernization projects align strongly with areas identified as supportive or infill development. In terms of fiscal impacts, please note that several of the RCPs are still in early planning and have incomplete cost estimates, these largely show up in that conceptual category that will be unconstrained in the plan. But we do include them for purposes of transparency, kind of understanding their synergy with other projects, as well as just to help, provide that line of sight to what could our future look like with the transportation projects that are currently being imagined. The evaluation framework emphasizes balancing existing repair needs with future system performance. During the August TC meeting, we talked about the significance of asset management needs within our region, and this is reflected in the RCP submitted. Transit projects show particularly strong benefits this is moving on to the economically disconnected areas. Transit projects show particularly strong benefits in this category, as well as, again, for the emissions reduction and infill development. Highway projects were particularly strong for freight and overall system reliability. As we'll get to in a few moments in the financial plan update, with limited revenues, prioritization will be critical. Decisions on which projects to fiscally constrain will shape how the region prioritizes its limited resources to advance regional goals. Okay, want to take a moment to highlight this, excited about this map. Alongside the draft RCP benefits report, we've also developed an interactive web application to make information more accessible. The application allows committee members, partners, and the public to explore the projects included in the draft report in an easy-to-use map-based format. How it works, users can click on projects to see basic information such as project location, type, and cost. The application also includes search and filter tools, so users can quickly find projects of interest. For example, you can search by project type, geography, or sponsoring agency. To access this map, a link has been included in the Transportation Committee memo. And this resource is meant to complement the report, making it easier to explore and understand the scale and distribution of proposed regional capital projects across the region. And on the next slide, want to get into the next steps of the process. So I don't want to steal too much thunder from Elizabeth's presentation, but one of the key takeaways from her presentation will be, or it's just important to underscore here, simply put, the region, we're not forecasting enough revenues to cover everything that was submitted through this process. So because revenues are likely to fall short of all the needs that have been identified, CMAP will have to work closely with resource group members to prioritize projects for the fiscally constrained list. This process will help us identify which projects can realistically move forward under federal rules. It's important to remember that why this matters is that only constrained projects are eligible to pursue federal funding and receive necessary federal approvals. Unconstrained projects may still reflect important regional needs, but without identified revenues, they cannot be advanced within the current RTP. On the next slide, I showed this slide before, but want to revisit it since this is the process we're going to be entering into. Financial constraint is what forces us to make choices. It's how we determine which projects can be fiscally constrained and which will remain unconstrained. So within this framework, the green side is the constrained list, the red side is the unconstrained list. Within those categories, you have those concept projects that we've been talking about. These are those projects that are just kind of initial ideas. They're not fully baked yet. There's not enough information to evaluate them or to be able to include them in the plan. But for transparency and other reasons, we think it's important to be able to include them in the RTP. Then you have that, this is the federal term illustrative list. It's basically those projects that if we had more funding, we could move them forward. It's not to say they're not important or valuable, just not enough revenues and didn't make the cut compared to rest of them. And so that's that bucket. And then getting into the constrained list, we in the financial plan look at it in terms of when these projects are planned to move forward and think about it in that context. And then, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Within the constrained list, is where we're this cycle looking to add some additional detail around prioritization. Before it was just you made it into the constrained or unconstrained list. This time around, we're hoping to provide a little bit of prioritization to highlight those projects that provide regional benefits across multiple categories. So really those projects that are delivering the most results. Important to note that we do factor cost into this. So when you look in the RCP benefits report, cost is included as part of the evaluation and the return on investment. Also want to just note that even if a project doesn't fall within the priority project kind of category, it's not to say that's not a valuable project, because there are some projects that might not have that across the board transformational kind of regional scale impact. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value for localized benefits or specific things like improving, you know, a roadway that is frequently flooding or an important freight route, something like that. So this isn't meant to communicate that there isn't value to those projects, just really meant to provide an emphasis on those projects that are providing significant value across multiple categories for the region. And so you stay on this is really my last slide, I think, before I hand it over to Elizabeth, but want to note some of those additional next steps. So we're going to be working to finalize the benefits report. We're going to be working to do some additional, there's a couple areas where we just want to investigate a little bit more on what we're seeing. This is what resulted in being able to understand the error in how emissions calculations were being moved from the model into our spreadsheets. So we have some additional analysis we'd like to do there, but we're basically looking to finalize this report before we present at the joint board meeting in October. Let's see here. So then CMAP will begin conducting another round of one-on-one discussions with implementing agencies. These conversations will focus on evaluation results for their specific projects and working to understand what are their short-term and long-term priorities so we can factor that into the prioritization conversations. Then we'll work to reconvene the resource group to begin the prioritization process. And this discussion will cover not only what projects fall into that constrained versus unconstrained list, but also which of them rise to the priority projects category. It's also important to note that while the evaluation results that are included in the benefits report are essential to those conversations, there are those other factors that we'll be considering through the prioritization process. These are things like geographic and modal balance, as well as input we've received from the public and other strategic factors. In terms of timeline, the goal is to bring a prioritized list back to the Transportation Committee later this year or potentially early 2026, depending on how fast we're able to move through the prioritization process. But ultimately, the constrained list of projects needs to be identified before we release the plan for public review in June of 2026. But we also have to do the air quality conformity review or analysis of it, so we need it finalized even a bit before then. I'll pause there. That was a lot. Does anybody have any questions or comments before I hand it over to Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think we have a couple. I do just want to make a quick announcement. P.S. Siraj joined us at the table from UAC, just for those folks online. And I think we have Tom had a question, and then Heidi.
Ryan, thank you. Thomas Bamonte, MPC. It looks like the benefits part of the analysis is very heavily driven by the air quality model and the travel demand model. What has CMAP done, maybe looking at past iteration of those models, mapping against actual conditions to kind of stress test those models to make sure there's a high level of confidence in them?
Yeah, I might need Amy's help a little bit with this, but I'll start by saying that if we remember there's a previous slide where we talk about the different evaluation categories. And so when we look at existing, the evaluation criteria that are in the existing condition kind of bucket, that's essentially a GIS analysis. That's for that. It's that future needs bucket that is where we use the model to help forecast. Because we're working because this plan is basically a continuation of Onto 2050 in terms of an update, we are trying to stick largely to the same process and methods that we used in that space with some of the tweaks we've made that were mentioned before. Yeah, so that is largely how we've done that. In terms of how we update the model, there has been work in the congestion management stream of work to look for opportunities for how improvements could be made, though none of those could be completed within the timeline that we have for this 2026 RTP. So those have been something that are there, something that we're looking to think through how we might incorporate that for future process, but not able to include this time around. But in terms of just general process to update the model, I would have to look to Amy.
Yeah, I think you covered it primarily, Ryan, but I think the thing that you want to look for the most in this process is the update of our socioeconomic forecast. That's what will really move the dial. As we've shared before, what we see is a slowing in our growth. Our region will continue to grow, but from the last forecast, we do see a decline in how much we're going to be growing. And that is quite honestly where you're going to see most movement in how the model results will change. So that's something that we want to kind of pay attention to.
But has CMAP ever gone back and said 10 years ago, our models forecasted X and we've tracked how things have gone and we're off by 5%, 50%, that kind of stress testing?
It's a good question. And if it were a very predictable process of the region of onlining improvements along the major interstates and things like that, then it would be easier to do that retroactive look and be able to say, yep, we fulfilled everything we said the plan would fulfill. That's just not the reality, right? This is always a forecast. We know that when we look at something from now to 25 years out, things are likely to change. We have a pandemic, people are working from home. We didn't get the funding that we thought we were going to get for that one project, right? So these things are harder then to look retroactively to assess how did we do on the implementation of the last plan. Yeah.
Great. And then I got Heidi PS and then Kyle.
Heidi Files with Kane County Division of Transportation. Can you please quickly remind me before I ask my question about the threshold for the regional capital projects? It changed since the last RTP.
Yeah.
Can you just remind me the threshold?
Yeah. So there's a reminder that previously for RSPs for Onto 2050, it was $100 million for capacity projects and $250 for state of good repair. The change that was made this time around was for capacity projects to be able to make sure that we were able to be proactive about our air quality responsibilities. We removed the dollar threshold from capacity on the NHS. So it's any capacity additions to the NHS have to go through the RCP process. And then we kept the $250 million threshold, but opened it up to any surface transportation project that is over $250 million, not just state of good repair.
Thank you. And so here's my question. I guess it's two quick questions. One of the projects or the project that we submitted was Randall Road because we have a long stretch of multi-mile on this NHS corridor that has capacity improvements planned for in the next 10 years. If it didn't make the cut for your regional project and we end up, some of these projects would be smaller projects anyways, but if they're not in the regional capital projects, are you saying that they wouldn't be eligible for federal funding at all? And then when you have council mayors who in 2 years, they have an ad lane, they couldn't do an ad lane on a project that wasn't in the RCP? Because they wouldn't be federally eligible?
If it's on the national highway system,
okay.
That's accurate. I think part of what we're going to have in this next step of the process is, again, thinking of those short-term versus long-term priorities. In something like Randall Road, maybe the conversation is recognizing that the whole segment is something that we needed to analyze, but maybe we want to fiscally constrain a segment of it and leave rest of it. Not saying this is what's going to happen, but just hypothetically, that could be the conversation that we have. So making sure that we're still able to move forward with those near term. By near term, I'm saying within the next 10 years kind of time.
Are there any concerns that if you have a smaller project, that, let's say a 10 to $15 million project that, you know, comes to light in 2 years and we start doing engineering and we wanted to get it in the tip, that because it's small and it's not in a regional capital project, but it's an ad capacity, that it wouldn't be eligible for any federal funding? Is that,
Yeah.
is that a concern at all?
I mean, that is definitely a factor, something that we would have to be thinking about. In terms of the definition of thresholds, that was just, we were aligning it with the minimum federal requirements. So that was trying to bring us in alignment with that. One of the things that we have underway right now and that will be coming back to the resource group as well as to this committee to discuss are the amendment procedures for the plan. So if something does come up in 2 years, what does the process look like to be able to consider that, to be able to pull it into the plan in a way that trying to balance that, you know, those federal responsibilities, the due diligence that we want to do as a region with not wanting to slow down projects for our implementing partners.
Okay, I guess I, for some reason, it didn't click until now that very small projects could still be then hindered by not being identified in a regional capital project. Okay,
Yeah.
makes me rethink. Thank you.
Yeah. Cost threshold has disappeared for expansion projects on the NHS. It doesn't count towards like minor arterials or improvements to the NHS that aren't adding capacity, but.
All right, thanks Heidi. PS, still a question?
Just a clarifying question. Given the seemingly changing federal priorities, did CMAP staff have to make any changes in how regional priority is defined, at least overtly?
Could you say more?
So there are certain things that are not necessarily supported by this current USDOT. And I'm just wondering if any of the regional significant or regional priority projects had to be remorphed within CMAP in order to be in line with the federal, because you need to be in line with the federal priorities. So I'm just wondering, given what you said earlier, this is an extension of on to 2050, which may have been a different line for traversing, and now we are on a different trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Amy might be able to fill in more, but I will say that we have definitely, as we were going through the evaluation criteria process, we're very careful to make sure that we were looking to make sure that we were bringing those in alignment with federal priorities, but in a way that still hold true to the values and goals of the region. I feel confident that we've done that. We've been working alongside our federal partners throughout the process. But Amy, if you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, you covered it, right? And this is why we were very careful a few months ago, walking through the emerging priorities in that work and sort of stepping you all through that. It was based on feedback from all of our partners, federal to local, to understand, do our values still hold? Do we need to revisit some of these things? And that's now what's reflected in the work that you see.
Great. I think we have Kyle and then Tara.
Kyle Whitehead, RTA. Yeah, building off of Thomas's question a bit, I'm curious if we've been able to identify any opportunities to account for induced demand in this evaluation process. I know it was a big conversation during the plan update when there were a lot of lane miles added to arterials, and the conversation that we had at that time is, you know, we're kind of, our hands are tied by the tools that we have available, and that could be a bigger conversation with the bigger plan update a few years later. And now, I mean, I think that we're at that point, and I was part of the congestion resource group, and they kind of looked at the model, and what I heard is there's not a lot of opportunity for change or improvement, and now that's what we're hearing here. So I guess I'm concerned hearing some of those, you know, those big numbers that we're talking about in terms of additional lane miles. We just talked about a region where growth is slowing. So I understand the project. These are just projects that have been submitted. We're going to go through a prioritization process. And there are capacity projects that bring benefits that will be accounted for in the process. But how can we make sure that potential costs of these additional lane miles are being accurately captured in our evaluation moving forward?
Yeah. I'm probably not the best person to speak to what our model captures or not, but my understanding is that our model does capture kind of more near-term induced demand. So that is a piece of it. There's a longer part that's really difficult to be able to capture in the model. Our model is kind of best practice kind of thing among our peers. We're seen as doing it, best practice type of a methodology. But it does have its limitations, and it can only be useful in some ways. I think it is something that we talked about early on, but again, with this being a continuation of ENTRE 2050, we weren't looking to make a bunch of changes, but one of the things we will be looking to do is when we get towards the end of this process and working with the resource group to reflect on what's working and what's not working, and knowing that we have more time ahead of us to be able to make some of those changes like we've been talking about in the congestion management space. That's a space where we could talk about if there's ways we could change the process for how we do this. But I would be hesitant to change it midstream this time around, especially when early on we looked, and just even if we made the changes starting like a year and a half ago, it wouldn't have been done in time. We wouldn't have had it in time to complete this RTP by the 2026 deadline. And it's probably not a satisfying answer, but Amy, maybe you have more to build on.
Yeah, I think what's important to recognize, right, is that these models that we have, we know that they're not perfect. They are indicators, right? General indicators of what's happening and how these projects are going to impact us at a regional level. There is still a lot of emphasis put on the professional judgment and the collective wisdom of the region to bring light to maybe where those models aren't clearly depicting what might actually happen in the future. And so it's just one of many tools that we're trying to use here. So take heart, right? I think your voice is important and we want to continue to hear that. But we also need to turn to these sorts of tools that at least give us a place to start to have those conversations.
Hi, Ryan. Tara Orban from Cook County. Regarding the presentation, very informative. I think the benefits report also really captures kind of where we were and where we are right now. And I love this slide that we have up on the screen, because then it paints the picture of how and what are we picking, right? We're picking those that have because Heidi, I want to build on your question and comment. The big aha for me as well. I think in the short term, all of us have our 5-year program built, right? And the 5 to 10 year is where I'm really thinking the big aha for me, because individually as implementing agencies, we have our priority projects, and this exhibit here demonstrates that those that are of the highest regional priority within that time frame will be added and fiscally constrained. But I think all of us implementing agencies, we each probably have our 5 to 10 up here where we want to try to line up that funding to implement those projects. And so the aha is, and I understand amongst all of these projects with great value, maybe more locally than regionally, they might not make the cut for being in the RCP, but this draft report outlines which ones are triggered to be in RCP. And therefore, am I hearing this right? This is, again, a clarification because I might need to hear it 5 times, that we won't be eligible for federal funding if we meet one of those bullets that are in the report, like a trigger, because we're not in the fiscally constrained plan, and then we'd be subject to the amendment process.
Correct. So if you are this image is really or chart shows the constrained list of the financial plan and is meant to represent that previously that was the distinction. You're either on the constrained list or not, and that's what the prioritization was. And what we've heard from our partners, both within the region as well as from our funding partners at the state and federal level, is a desire to have more consensus building around what are those projects that are providing the most regional benefits that we can communicate to them as a priority for the region. That's what that yellow box is representing, kind of thinking about the IIJA priority project booklet work that we've been doing. That's meant to articulate how are we communicating those top priorities that provide regional scale benefits. And that's not to say that other projects that don't provide those same benefits won't move forward in the short term, medium term, and long term. But it's just that they're providing more localized benefits that aren't rising to the level of communicating that.
Okay.
If for projects that are on the unconstrained list, they're not showing up on this chart. It would be the previous one. That red section is where, meaning that if a project lands in that that unconstrained list category, that's when it's not eligible to pursue federal funds. And you would have to go through an amendment process to identify either what's the trade-off, what are we pulling out of the constrained list to be able to move that in, or have we identified additional revenues that weren't identified in the financial plan that are expanding the pie that'll allow us to move that project from unconstrained to constrained.
So I think the question is part of the process moving forward, we're going to be working together to determine what projects are on the fiscally constrained list. And I think we're going to see a lot of tension with that 5 to 10 year, because there's ones as agencies we want to implement, but recognizing the fiscal constraint and how we maneuver that moving forward after we draw the line in the sand for the plan will be a challenge that I think we all look forward to working with CMAP on.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kara.
Kara Bader, CTA. Thanks, Ryan. And I know that your team and through the resource group has been doing a ton of work, and appreciate that it's all very hard. Could you talk a little bit about how in the draft that I reviewed, there are certain evaluation criteria that for some types of projects are quantifiable, and for other types of projects, the standard is more order of magnitude. Like, as we think about sort of weighting different projects that are rated on different criteria against each other, how do you all plan to go about that? And sort of what's the timeline for sharing with the resource committee members and others, knowing that then there's a desire to share some of this at the joint meeting and you're on a, constrained timeline to wrap that up?
Yeah. So we have a couple of pathways forward, again, reflecting on the next steps with those individual conversations with the implementing agencies to understand their near-term and long-term priorities. We have a lot of things like, for example, not to point out IDOT, but with IDOT, we have basically all the reconstruction projects that need to happen are included in there. And we know realistically, we're probably not going to see every non-tolled interstate be reconstructed between now and 2050. And so it's a matter of those, which ones are the ones do we think are most likely to move forward? Are there some of these that we can unconstrain now and revisit 4 years from now or 8 years from now, or future cycles of the RTP? We think that alone will help bring us a lot closer to that constraint. So then when we get to the resource group, we'll have a better understanding of, after we've gone through the individual priorities of implementation or the implementers, how much of a difference do we have left to try to figure out how to bring it into constraint. And that's really when we'll be looking to the evaluation criteria. We do have the transportation project analysis tool, or TPAT, that's been developed. We did a presentation on that with the resource group before. That's a tool that we have at our disposal to help that purpose of that tool is to be able to compare different project types against one another. And our evaluation criteria was designed in a way to help facilitate that. So that is a resource we have. We're not entirely sure we actually need to use it though or not. It's going to depend on what that first round of one-on-one conversations looks like and how close we're actually getting to coming within constraint. But that's what that next resource group meeting will be, is kind of circling back. Here's where we're at, and here's how we think we make the decisions to, if there is still projects that we need to shift to unconstrained, likely be using that tool, and the other factors, an analysis of things like modal balance, geographic balance, feedback that we've heard from our public outreach, things like that.
Thanks. And then could you, sort of taking a step back, a lot of the discussion I heard from previous questions is you all are on sort of a deadline to wrap up this RTP. But then as a region, we're now looking at the century plan and that next sort of 50-year milestone. Sort of what's the relationship between the foundations of this plan and the constraints that we're doing it under, and then sort of that more visionary next step?
Yeah, great question. In an ideal world, the century plan would come first and the RTP would come immediately after that. But again, we have the federal deadline to adopt by October 2026, which just wasn't feasible to be able to do this after the century plan work. So that's why we're seeing this as a continuation of Onto 2050 and really seeing it a continuation of the principles and the goals and things that came out of that work. The century plan, though, is there has been some opportunities for synergy with that work. Our existing conditions work was done in parallel. So the work that you see come out of that, it's going to be a much bigger scope than what we shared out here. We are focused more on the things directly related to transportation. That'll get into things like water and other things beyond what were shared in this space. But so there were some ways that we were able to kind of tie into that work. But really the 2030 RTP will be the space where you see the big policy shifts and changes to process or policy that came out of the conversations from the century plan and that kind of vision for what the future looks like.
Awesome. Any other questions for Ryan? All right. Oh, one more, sorry.
For this, as well as the earlier stuff that Russell presented, what's the best way to submit questions about projects or to learn more about projects?
Feel free to email me directly. It's rtomto at cmap.illinois.gov. Happy to share that with you too. I think you already have it, but we have already received some comments from partners. And so what our plan is we've been taking that in and we're working to respond directly, but we're also going to anonymize and consolidate that into a document that we put on our resource or our Engagement HQ site so that there's transparency about what questions have been asked and what our responses to them were.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad everyone drank coffee today. Seems like we're on it. Again, I'm Elizabeth Ginsburg. I'm a senior policy analyst here at CMAP, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here to give you all an update on the financial plan. Next slide. So this is a familiar slide, but just a reminder of why we're doing the financial plan. And I think the conversation we just had illustrates a lot of that, but really we're federally required to show that the plan is fiscally constrained, which means that there's sufficient revenue, or there will be sufficient revenue over the plan period to support all of the investments that are identified and recommended by the plan. In the past, baseline revenues alone have been insufficient to cover all of the planned expenditures, and that is the case again this year. And that's where we'll bring in some of our reasonably expected revenue recommendations. But I'm excited. So in the past, we've talked about baseline revenues. I'm excited that today we can talk about the rest of this chart. We'll bring in reasonably expected revenues. And then as Ryan previewed, we'll bring in the expenditure forecast. So next slide. Just as a reminder, baseline revenues are typically organized into 4 categories. That is federal revenues, state revenues, local revenues, and then system-generated revenues. Since last spring, we have updated the assumption for how state-programmed federal funding reaches our region. And we continue to plan to continue evaluating this assumption in partnership with the TIP team as they're developing the next set of marks. We've also incorporated competitive federal funding assumptions that were missing when we were here in April, and we based this on the region's past awards from key competitive funding programs. We've also completed our assessment of local government revenues, And we've continued to refine the transit operating expenditure model to account for future transit ridership and the associated fare revenue. One thing to note is that when we presented in the past, we were assuming we were using a scenario where the transit system only received the revenue it needed to fill the fiscal cliff. We're now incorporating the full transformational investment, and I'll point that out later on because it has some implications. Next slide. So as currently estimated, the baseline revenue forecast for 2027 to 2050 is estimating about $455 billion. And this spans across the 4 categories I discussed previously. This is compared to $488 billion in the financial plan forecast. That was a part of the plan update. But again, that was a longer plan period. So if you go ahead and jump to the next slide. Although the total baseline revenue forecast is less than the previous forecast, this is largely due to the shorter plan horizon. Both state and system-generated revenues are forecasted to come in line about the same on an annual average basis. Local revenues are projected to far exceed previous forecasts, and this is largely due to improvements to the RTA sales tax or the sales tax in general, now that it collects revenues from remote sales transactions. And then on the federal revenue side, we're currently forecasting less money than they forecasted previously. And this is largely due to refining the assumption about how much money our region gets from that state programmed pot. Next slide. When I was here in August, I mentioned that we've selected and we're working on forecasting 5 different reasonably expected revenues. Again, these are revenues that are not currently in place today, but could reasonably be implemented over the plan period. Each of these reasonably expected revenues have been long-standing recommendations for the region and are supported by considerable policy work, not just at CMAP, but from many of our partners in the region as well. But notably, each recommendation is also supported by recent policy work, much of which is pictured here on this slide. That includes the Modernizing Illinois Sales Tax report that came out earlier this year, last winter. In the agendas you received and the memos, we linked to the Transportation Funding Strategies policy brief. And just today, we posted the Tolling and Pricing Strategies policy brief on our financial plan engagement HQ page. So all 3 of those reports are linked there. And then we'll also be coming out shortly with our road usage charge white paper, which will talk about the next steps for advancing a road usage charge in Illinois. Next slide. Across these 5 reasonably expected revenues, we're forecasting $69 billion in potential revenues over the plan period. This includes $19 billion from sales tax modernization, $14 billion from road usage charge, $13 billion from a freight delivery fee, $12 billion from tolling reconstruction projects, and $11 billion from regional revenue sources such as a motor vehicle registration surcharge in our region and a TNC tax in our region. Notably, the sales tax forecast is a little less than twice what it has been in the past. It was $11 billion in the last financial plan. We believe that this is really based in the updated work and in the really good modeling that was done under PART that allows us to feel really confident about the benefits of sales tax modernization for the transportation system. For road usage charge, we're assuming that a 3 cents per mile road usage charge would be implemented in 2035. Notably, if the 3 cents per mile surcharge were implemented in 2030, we estimate that it could generate $23 billion, which demonstrates that there's significant opportunity risk the longer we wait to move towards a road usage charge and away from the motor fuel tax. Next slide.
I just hate to interrupt. Could you just go back a slide? I'm curious how tollway reconstructions generates revenue.
Great question. So we, in the last plan, in the last financial plan, and again in this financial plan, we're recommending that all of the reconstruction projects that are included as or as regional capital projects would have tolling as a part of them. And then we model the toll revenue that could be used to provide to bond out those projects.
So that's not referring to reconstruction of the tollway system. It is that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's jump to expenditures. So like revenues, the financial plan organizes expenditures into 4 distinct categories. Although these categories may not reflect how you all think about projects, for instance, we know that the I-290 project incorporates important state of good repair, modernization, and capacity improvements. These categories help with our forecasting and also help with organizing many of our policy recommendations. The first category is operating and maintaining the existing system in its current condition. So this is the state, tollway, and local government operating expenditures, which includes debt service, existing debt service obligations. This includes transit operating expenditures for the current level of service that's provided by our transit system. And this also includes maintenance on our pavement, on our bridges, and on our transit assets that would keep those assets in their existing or current present day conditions. The second category is improving the system to meet the plan's goals. So these are those expenditures that would be required to improve all of those capital assets from their existing condition to the target set by the plan. We've also used the costs that we have been working with IDOT and RTA to develop to extrapolate costs for the non-NHS portions of the system. And we'll continue to work with IDOT to refine those assumptions. The third bucket is enhancing the system. So this includes program priority expenditures, which I'll talk about a bit on the next slide, as well as the transit operating costs associated with a greater level of service on the transit system. As I mentioned previously, we're assuming that that greater level of service will be provided, which is reflected both in the costs here and in the fare revenue assumption in the baseline revenue forecast. And last but not least, we account for, the costs of new capacity on the system. So this includes the capacity costs associated with the RCP projects we were just discussing, as well as the new operations and maintenance costs that are provided by the RCP modeling process. All right, now we can jump in. Ryan mentioned the priority programs, which will be used as a part of the prioritization process for the RCPs. Program priorities are key issues or challenges that are facing the region, and identifying them in the RTP allows us to align investments with regional goals and objectives and provides opportunities for transparent and collaborative decision-making. As it relates to the financial plan, identifying these priority programs allows us to ensure that important policy-related investments are being accounted for and constrained accordingly. At this time, the priority program costs that are included in the system enhancements bucket includes active transportation costs. This is the completion of the Greenways and Trails plan, some costs associated with providing and improving sidewalks and bike lanes near transit stations across the region, as well as costs that were submitted by implementers through the RCP process. It also includes some ADA accessibility costs. For the purposes of this plan, that is confined to the costs required to make all of the transit stations in the region fully ADA accessible. We estimated the costs for grade separations, crossings, and related safety improvements and have incorporated them. And last but not least, this includes the costs of transit decarbonization, or in other words, the costs of fully electrifying the transit fleet in line with current state mandates. Next slide. Federal requirements state that the financial plan has to show all costs in year of expenditure, which means that cost growth is an important input and assumption for the development of the financial plan. The past financial plans used a flat 2.5% assumption for cost growth over the life of the respective plan periods. But we know that construction costs in recent years have been surging far beyond that 2.5% assumption. And we also know that actually historical cost growth has far exceeded that 2.5% assumption. Next slide. CMAP developed low, medium, and high cost growth scenarios based on the data that was shown in the chart on the previous slide from the National Highway Construction Cost Index in order to estimate cost growth in the financial plan. We worked with our resource group to kind of validate these scenarios, and we're continuing to refine them. In particular, we're going to work to create a transit-specific cost growth scenario that incorporates more transit-related price producer indices rather than the National Highway Construction Cost Index. But importantly, the compound growth that these cost growth scenarios provide, or that occurs as a result of them, has really important implications for the fiscal constraints. There's an example on the slide here. For the grade crossings and related safety improvement costs I mentioned a moment ago that are included as a part of the priority programs, our team estimated that approximately $150 million would be spent per year to implement these projects. Of course, that factors in a certain number of projects that are occurring each decade. But when we apply the different cost growth scenarios to that assumption, we get a variety of potential total costs. So compared to $3 billion over the life of the plan unadjusted, the potential costs range from $5 billion to almost $12 billion. Right now in the plan, and based on the feedback from our resource group, we're primarily using the medium cost growth scenario. But we are currently using low for transit costs since we're continuing to refine those assumptions. Next slide. Bringing all of these factors together, the current draft expenditure forecast is $667 billion over the 24-year life of the plan. This is significantly higher than the $526 billion draft expenditure, or not draft, actual expenditure forecast that was adopted as a part of the plan update. Notably, the $26 billion in unadjusted committed and future RCP projects that are, so $26 billion in 2025 is estimated to be about $60 billion over the life of the plan. Next slide. On a year-by-year basis, again, we have a shorter plan horizon than they did last time. We're showing higher costs across all 4 buckets of the expenditure forecasts. And this, notably, you'll see the capacity piece. In the Onto 2050 update, capacity costs were 4% of the total draft, or the total expenditure forecast. Right now, with the full universe of costs that, again, we will prioritize and reevaluate, it's about 9% of the total expenditures. We're also seeing higher enhancement costs associated with the analyses that were done to build out the priority programs. Next slide. So altogether, when we bring our draft revenue forecasts together with our reasonably expected revenues, the fiscal constraint is currently estimated to be $524 billion compared to our draft expenditure forecast, which again is $667 billion. The next steps, as Ryan mentioned, includes working with all of you to figure out which costs can reasonably be constrained in the plan so that when it's adopted, we have a fully fiscally constrained plan. Next slide. As I mentioned, these are draft forecasts. I'll say capital D draft. I think we have a lot of refinement to do on the expenditure side and are shooting to get most of that completed by the time we present to the MPO in October. But we're also going to coordinate with the RCP team and you all on the prioritization process. In August, I presented on the risk assessment that we'll be conducting, which explores various risks to the fiscal constraints. We're getting underway with CDM Smith to do that analysis. And then we're also working to develop documentation for the various forecasts that underpin all of these numbers. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, yes.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Do you mind going back to the slide on I think it's the slide just before this.
The fun one.
For that 524 billion, what percent or dollar amount of that are revenue sources that don't exist today, that have a policy barrier?
So that's the 69 billion in light blue, the reasonably expected revenues. I don't have that percentage in front of me right now, but I'm sure someone could calculate it for us.
Thank you.
If I could follow up, Elizabeth, the tolling of reconstructions, are those reconstructions only on IDOT expressways, or are there any other authorities running roadways?
No, so as I mentioned earlier, the tolling reconstruction reasonably expected revenues are associated only with those IDOT reconstructions that are currently included as RCPs and listed in the system benefits report. So I think it's $12 billion of anticipated tollway revenue. But we also have to work with the modeling team now that they're done modeling the RCPs. We can refine that number. And then also in the event that any of those reconstructions were unconstrained, the revenue associated with them would similarly go away.
I know that the Illinois or Indiana legislature empowered the Indiana DOT to explore tolling options and whatnot. To toll reconstructions, will we need changes to state law, and will we need federal approval to toll existing expressways being reconstructed?
I'm not sure about state law, but I can say federal law currently restricts the tolling of assets that were previously untolled. This is explored a little bit in the tolling and pricing strategies memo that we just posted today. But yes, federal approval would be needed on all of those projects.
Thank you.
All right, I had a quick question and looking around to see if anyone else has any first. But following up on that, on this slide, it's about $140 billion difference. And then if you take out the reasonably expected revenues that, we're uncertain on, it's close to 200 billion. But how does that compare, do we know, to the previous plan? Because when we're looking at it, it seems like a big discrepancy or big difference, right? But, maybe it's kind of similar to past plans. I know construction costs have gone up and whatnot, but just kind of curious if we know that or if we can find that out at some point.
Yeah, I think I can definitely look into that and probably provide a better answer after the fact. But I will say, I think the cost growth factors are driving a lot of this. The past plan, again, we had $526 billion fiscally constrained plan. That was both on the revenue and the cost side. I was not here at that time, so I'm not sure how much conversation happened to kind of shift the two lines to match each other. But we did not have to do as much prioritization last time as we do this time.
It seems like, not to make a statement like this, but it seems like that cost increases have kind of outpaced the revenues that we have. I know the MFT is now indexed and things like that, but
yeah, but I think to that point, MFT is indexed to inflation, which is lower. I think on the chart we showed it did have CPIU. That's what MFT is indexed to. Cost growth has far exceeded that indexing over time.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Good. All right, thank you.
All right, good morning. Who wants to talk about trains and buses? All right. If we move on to the next slide, Ryan had introduced this a little bit, and you may remember, for those of you who were here at the last Transportation Committee meeting, that I'm working through a series of policy briefs. And these are really intended as sort of short memos that kind of support the RTP development, looking at the current state of practice in the region, emerging trends locally, nationally, internationally, some of the key issues, looking at some peer examples we might be able to point to, and seeing if there are any opportunities we can pull from that. And really, at the end of the day, these are not intended to be comprehensive or some detailed assessment, but to really get us kind of brainstorming and thinking, are there some ideas out there that perhaps we ought to be exploring? So you guys, in November, will have to tolerate me one more time to talk about innovative finance and project delivery and emerging technologies. But today we're going to talk about intercity bus and rail. If we go to the next slide, please. So why did we decide to do this? Working with Ryan and others at CMAP, we realized there are extensive plans and projects around intercity passenger rail already out there. And so we wanted to explore that a bit. The potential closure of the intercity bus terminal was weighing heavily on our minds. And then there were also some challenges with the federal certification last time to really look at improving connectivity with those intercity modes. So as we talk through things today, see if there are some things that perhaps resonate with you. If we go to the next slide. So looking at the infrastructure, and I realize there's a lot of dots on this map, but eventually you will receive a version of this report that will have that map in it. But to summarize for you, there are 16 intercity passenger rail routes serving 8 different stations in Northeast Illinois. And on those, you can reach 33 states in the District of Columbia on a single ride. Intercity bus service also has, in addition to stopping downtown, has a variety of stops around Northeast Illinois with a lot of different bus companies operating in the region. And I think the key takeaway here is the region does benefit from an extensive legacy transportation system, as we do with all modes, but rail and bus is certainly in there as well. Next slide, please. There are also a lot of plans for expansion already out there that I think the folks in this room should be fairly well familiar with, because a lot of them have come through this room and have found their way into past versions of the RTP, have been funded through combinations of federal grants that have been applied for and various versions of local and agency funding. So the Chicago Hub Improvement Program for Amtrak, which includes a variety of sort of track and bridge improvements in Northeast Illinois and in Michigan, as well as the Chicago Union Station Master Plan, which is included as part of that. But if you look at those graphics kind of at the top there, there are also some very aggressive plans that have come out from the Federal Railroad Administration and from Amtrak on Midwest and nationwide service that really look at expanding routes and expanding frequency. And then there's a whole host of other things sort of in the works that are identified in this report, but you've got the corridor identification program, you've got the state working on a variety of plans and routes and high-speed rail and coordination with other neighboring states that are also working on similar such efforts. With the Chicago Hub Improvement Program and some of the Union Station stuff, there are grants there that are in the works right now, money that's coming in or about to come in, projects that are in design and under construction, and including that nice shot of the mail platform sitting underneath our feet right now. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to dwell on this slide for a few minutes, because I think there's some interesting things to note going on here in the region and kind of across the country that perhaps can guide us to thinking about doing things a little bit differently or exploring some interesting options. And kind of starting in that first general bucket, in other words, things that would impact both intercity rail and intercity bus. I think the perceived role of government and government's role in these modes is changing. I think it's farther along in that change on the intercity rail side of things, as we've seen more and more investment, particularly in the IIJA, going into intercity passenger rail. But just as the public sector has been really sort of almost entirely responsible for auto travel, funding roadways and building and operating roadways, and certainly supports aviation through airport development, airline subsidies, intermodal connectivity at airports. You're starting to see states and regions across the country get more engaged on the intercity bus side of things as well, and really sort of bring that into the fray as something that's adding value, that it's not just private sector bus operations. And I think really sort of thinking of that as how does it connect into our other modes within the region. And then on the in terms of ridership and the services that are being provided, we have increases in Amtrak services. We have the new Borealis coming out of Chicago. There's increases in frequencies on routes around the country. And ridership is kind of going through the roof. And I know it's almost hard to imagine as we sit here and we have our struggles with bringing ridership back for sort of local and regional transit, but at the intercity level, things are going really well. Amtrak ridership is back at above pre-COVID levels at the national level. It's just about caught up to that here in the Midwest. And intercity bus is kind of in the same bucket there. They're also back to pre-COVID, beyond pre-COVID levels. They're estimated in 2025 nationally to grow at about 4%, which is really more than auto or aviation is expected to grow. And intercity bus is also proposing new routes coming out even out of this region. And then sort of a shifting of the philosophy around short haul flights. And let me just sort of preface this with a little bit of information and data, which I found rather enlightening. So about 45% of aircraft movements at O'Hare are on regional jets. So even though the number of aircraft movements, operations at O'Hare is often the highest in the country and in the world, depending on the day of the week, it actually has a relatively low number of seats per plane. But when you invest billions in infrastructure and the runways, and of course now with O'Hare 21 and in the terminals, I mean, at the end of the day, that regional jet with a few people on it is still occupying space on that runway, on the taxiway, and occupying a gate. And also those kind of short haul flights tend not to be that financially productive for the airlines either, who are really just using them to feed into their long haul routes. And these are serving popular destinations are Milwaukee, Indianapolis, South Bend, St. Louis, Madison. So for those of you who have traveled in Europe, know that there's plenty of examples where direct intercity rail connections to airports are kind of serving the role of those kinds of connections for those distances, and often have codeshare arrangements with the airlines, and everybody is sort of financially benefiting from that. But there's also some really good examples in sort of leveraging intercity bus in the same way, and that's happening now in the United States, and it's actually happening now in Chicago. And American Airlines, for example, they recently announced that they're going to be using intercity coach buses to replace their flights to Rockford and to South Bend. And so these are nice coach style buses. Passengers would clear security in South Bend or clear security in Rockford and take the bus into O'Hare and arrive airside. But the airlines, and there's other examples across the country with United, Air Canada, and Sun Country taking this approach as well. Next slide, please. Oh, no, stay on this slide. Don't. This is actually the right slide. So I just want to move to the next bucket, though, intercity rail, to kind of focus in on that a little bit. We talked about increased funding. We recognize that some of that funding may be a little bit uncertain moving forward to future years, but we still have monies that are moving through the system and grants that are moving through the system. I spoke a few slides back about some of those bold plans that are out there. We have the FRA, Midwest Regional Plan, Amtrak, Illinois, the high-speed rail feasibility study. But all of these things require infrastructure, require more track capacity, upgraded track, additional capacity at Chicago Union Station, for example, to be able to accommodate those bold and innovative plans. And then there's also some different operating models out there. I'm sure many of you have heard of Brightline operating on their own infrastructure and right-of-way down in Florida. They're also building a new high-speed rail line in the desert between Las Vegas and LA. But also, and many of you may be aware of this, but through 2008 legislation and passenger rail, states are responsible for operating the short-haul intercity passenger rail line. So think service from here to Detroit, Milwaukee, St. Louis. And as a result, the states fund that, the states operate it, and they contract out with Amtrak to operate the service. But technically, they don't have to. They can contract with whomever they choose. In fact, David's going to be operating service out to Rockford in the not too distant future. Metra has that contract under IDOT to operate service, intercity passenger rail service. So the point is that there are other options out there. Maybe there's some innovative ideas. And then looking at the last bucket, real fast. Intercity bus, and I know this sometimes is a little bit more opaque in the sense that intercity buses are, at least around here, and entirely privately operated with some public funding to support some of the service. But you don't necessarily see a lot of sort of the behind the scenes of what they're thinking and why they're thinking, and it's even just hard to get data on the number of passengers. But if you take Flixbus, for example, that's the company that bought Greyhound. They're focused really kind of on the major markets and trying to shy away from the thinner markets. But one interesting thing is Flixbus and a lot of other intercity operators, they're really sort of focusing in on students and universities and connecting those communities. Bus routes connecting to major airports. I mean, besides the airlines directly coordinating with operators to provide this service just for their airline, ticketed airline connections by bus, there's also just a lot of service to airports that's increasing. But then, you'll see in a couple of examples shortly, there's also state-supported intercity bus networks that are continuing to expand in other states around the country. Now, despite some of this growth, there are these issues with the terminal closures, and we know that all too well here. Obviously, that's an ongoing issue as the agencies work through that in Chicago. But the challenge sort of lies in the fact that when Flixbus acquired Greyhound, the station assets were really not part of that deal. So the traditional downtown Greyhound stations have been lost in cities like Houston, Philadelphia, Portland, Richmond, some Ohio cities. Nashville's site has been listed for redevelopment. So that's the challenge there. Our station here serves 500,000 people roughly per year. It's a very diverse market from workers to students to the underserved to lots of vulnerable populations. If we lost our station, we would also be the largest city in the Northern Hemisphere without an intercity bus terminal. And I'll thank Joe Schwederman for this one, the coldest city in the world without an intercity bus terminal. So without really sort of that planning and coordination, it's hard to sort of work together on these types of things. And so a lot of regions are trying to focus in on that a little bit more and bring people together just to talk about these things, just having folks in the same room and thinking about, okay, how can we bring some of that into the fray in our planning? How can we work together in public-private partnerships, both for providing service, but also with, say, owning and developing intermodal bus services? And then use of curb space, that's a much broader issue, but how we manage that space and how buses use that in intercity buses, all of these things sort of connect together. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll run through just a couple of quick examples. These are going to lean a little bit more towards the bus side and the intermodal, but Atlanta provides a pretty good example. Well, first of all, their RTP does have an intercity bus section within it. I think that's worth noting. But then also the Georgia Department of Transportation administered the development and construction of a new intercity bus terminal down there. They accumulated FTA Section 5311 funds that they can use for rural intercity bus service. And engage in a public-private partnership with private carriers and put together a really nice signature station that has great intermodal connections to local bus and rail. Next slide, please. Denver and just generally the state of Colorado have some good examples as well. When you see this policy brief, at some point you'll see plenty of examples of states that pretty robustly fund their intercity passenger bus service and have processes in place to identify routes and cities that should be served and so forth. But often those are still branded according to the individual carriers. What's interesting about Bustang in Colorado is that it is publicly planned and funded, but it is branded as its own thing. It's branded as Bustang. And it's still privately operated, but I think that sort of makes it a pretty unique model. RTD, which is in Denver, the Denver region, they have sort of a similar type of approach to their sort of regional express bus system. They have a pretty robust network there. And we found that there's kind of synergies between those two things in terms of the infrastructure, both in terms of use of, say, shared lanes, HOV lanes, and the construction of that infrastructure, as well as the bus terminal. If any of you have been to Denver and Denver Union Station and the amazing redevelopment there, I mean, that's a great model both from the intercity passenger rail side and the intercity bus side with the construction of an underground bus terminal underneath the station that both those Bustang private operators and the regional bus system uses. And if we go to the next page, just three more quick examples. Just bringing people together just to talk is very valuable. We found that with Ohio DOT. My understanding is IDOT used to have something similar, but that hasn't been on the books for a little while. Washington State DOT, as well as Sound Transit in Seattle, they plan and fund regional and intercity bus service. They support transit centers for these buses. Again, things like HOV lanes and even HOV access ramps that connect onto highways from various bus terminals. And then South Station in Boston is a great example of a public-private partnership that's really strengthening intercity bus capacity, intermodal connections, and leveraging private dollars and gate fees from the bus operators to fund those. If we go to the next slide, we can jump into then kind of what are the key takeaways and some of the opportunities here. Some of them are fairly obvious and really sort of leveraging what an MPO like CMAP does best, right? Something like planning and programming, making sure that if we identify and see things that are really important for the region and for the transportation system, as I said, that has been done for the chip enhancements with Amtrak and Chicago Union Station, including those in the RTP and the TIP, but also sort of widening that tent to think about what role does intercity bus play in that, and how can we sort of prepare for intercity bus terminals and bus stops and stuff like that, and maybe even doing things like updating Create to sort of expand the envelope there as well on intercity passenger rail a little bit more. Facilitation of funding, again, this is what a group like this does. It's what you were just talking about. How do you prioritize your investments as a region, and how do you direct funding, and how do you help entities apply for federal grants? What are the opportunities for working together in public-private partnerships? Next slide, please. I mentioned about the Ohio DOT example of just bringing people together, bringing all the partners together. So at least we know what's going on. So we're not surprised when suddenly a large piece of infrastructure like an intercity bus terminal is about to shut down. But also just sort of using a little bit of that bully pulpit that we have here to promote it as a mode. Do people even know that it's there? Do people know that it's an option, right? In the same way that we're talking about commuter rail service, and we're talking about local bus service and things like that. And then, of course, within both of those modes, there's plenty of targeted infrastructure investments out there that we can think about that. Again, some of that stuff at Chicago Union Station, things that are in the CREATE program, they're already out there. We've identified a lot of those things. I think it's, again, a little bit less known on the intercity bus side, but again, we see investing in intercity bus terminals, obviously. In the near term, making sure we save the one that we have is probably most mission critical, but then that buys time to think long term. Then what does that look like? What does that look like for a region? But it's not just here in downtown Chicago. As I mentioned, there are bus stops, there are people that are relying on this service all across the region. And how do you get those buses in and out of the region efficiently and effectively with infrastructure that can be used not only by those operators, but might be able to be used by CTA and PACE, for example. So that's all I've got. And I apologize, I think that went a little longer, but I do get animated about this topic. Are there any questions that I might be able to answer on that?
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Any questions? Guess not. I think you did great.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Anything else, Ryan, or no, that's it? All right. Well, appreciate it. As we've always said, we really appreciate the work you guys are doing, the RTP team, and that was a great presentation. I know there's some good discussions and decisions to be coming up here, not too distant future. So great job. 6.02 is a legislative update. Pretty sure here it says Kasha's coming here to bring us home today. So provide us a legislative update. Good morning, Kasha.
Good morning. That's a little better. Hi, good to be with you all today. Kasha Hart with our Intergovernmental Affairs team. I do not have much of an update since we last convened in early August. The House and Senate, starting on the federal side, they have convened since their August recess, and really the biggest task before Congress right now is passing a continuing resolution to keep the government open by September 30th. So that's obviously a very fluid situation, one that we're continuing to monitor. The other big, piece of federal action that we're keeping an eye on is surface transportation reauthorization. As a reminder, IIJA is set to expire in September 2026. And so we have been working with many of you and other partners on developing some regional priorities for this next surface transportation reauthorization bill. So thank you all for your collaboration on that effort. Some of the priorities that have emerged through this process include investing in a system that works better for everyone, adopting a safe systems approach, fostering a robust regional economy, and enhancing quality of life across the region. Another through line throughout this process is also just retaining the federal transportation dollars that the region has, making sure that we preserve those. We also facilitated a similar effort with some of our MPO partners too, just to offer input from that perspective. So I believe at this point, both of those documents have been shared with the authorizing committees. And as the next step, we are just preparing for draft language once that becomes available. So looking forward to working with you all as we're able to respond to information as that becomes available. Shifting to the state side. So again, the General Assembly has been called out for the summer, but is scheduled to reconvene for veto session beginning October 14th. Do not have too much new to share from our August update, but again, we're continuing to engage with legislators, business partners, municipal partners, other stakeholders on the importance of addressing the transit fiscal cliff, both including revenues that are sufficient to meet our needs in the short term and in the long term. So I know we next convene in November, and so perhaps we can have a longer legislative update then to sort of understand what transpired in October. And we're looking forward to continuing to be a resource to the General Assembly as they're navigating these conversations that are also very fluid. Yeah, I think with that, that concludes our legislative update. Happy to take any questions folks have.
Great. Thank you, Kasha. Any questions? Yep, we got one.
This may not be necessarily for you, but I know there's been federal action this week and last week on past awarded grants. And I'm just wondering how our region and the state might be impacted by more money being taken away from us on Transpo.
Yeah, I think at this, I will have to take that back to get a more definitive answer for you, Amy. I know some of the unobligated awards have since been able to move forward following some of the federal court action that had previously been holding up certain funds due to litigation around immigration enforcement and USDOT grants. I don't know for sure if there are any other lingering impacts, but I'm happy to take that back and understand if there's anything outstanding.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Heidi Fowles, Kane County, just as an implementer, we haven't had anything clawed back, but we have had to change language in agreements that are ongoing under development because of some of the new rules, so.
Same on our end too, so. Any other questions? Kasha? All right, thank you. Moving on to item 7, is there any other business that committee members would like to bring forward today? Seeing none, moving on to item 8, public comment. Does anyone in the audience wish to address the committee today? If you are online, please notify staff by using the raise the hand function. Please wait for staff to identify you before addressing the committee. We have, okay, I think we have Garland Armstrong. Can you hear us?
Yes, Kevin, how you doing? It's Garland Armstrong, formerly of Elmwood Park and Des Plaines, and also a former CMAP for the Housing and Citizen Advisory Committee meeting. And I just want y'all to know that last month my mother passed away of cerebral hemorrhage. So I just want you to know that I'm still shaken up from last month. And so I just want you to know how I feel. But I also want to give kudos to David Kralik and Metra for finally getting the Grayland station on the Milwaukee District North Line station finally great and accessible. And I would like to ask David, how many cars can hold that station for the Grayland station? Because sometimes there might be 3 or 4, but how many cars can it hold it there at the Grayland station?
Garland, I don't have that information right off the top of my head, but we can look into that and get back to you. But I know that we did size the platform lengths at that station to be able to meet the passenger demand that was expected on that to be able to, and I believe we were able to get a little bit longer platform than was previously in place at that station.
Okay, great. Keep me posted on that to find out what is what about that, okay? And also I want to give kudos to those for the CTA for the red purple monetization for Wilson and for Lawrence, Argyle, Bryn Mawr, and Berwyn. And just wanted to say when I saw it, it was totally unbelievable. So I want to give kudos to the CTA representative there because they they've done a totally awesome job. And as a former CTA 80 advisory committee, that station is definitely the best of them all. And I hope you can do well on the other stations too, including when you do the red line extension, especially there's still some on the north side that before you hit Howard, like Jarvis and Morris and Thorndale, because those stations there, it's inaccessible. And people, especially in the disability community, have to go to other stations where it's accessible. So I hope you get that on the radar too. And then I pray that y'all get the funding what y'all need to make sure every station will be accessible, because it's definitely going to take forever going into maybe 2050 or 2060 to get it all done. So I hope y'all can get it well done for that. And also, yeah.
Awareness, we are targeting accessibility improvements for those north red line stations as a part of RPM next phases. And so we'll be talking about those as we release that phasing. So thanks.
All right. And one last thing too, I'm also concerned too about sidewalks, especially when there are sidewalks that's slightly up and it's not flat. Have you ever went out to different communities in different in your counties to make sure if there are some sidewalks that's slightly up but not completely flat, especially for those with mobility? Because one time when I was living in Elmwood Park, when my wife had a power wheelchair, I would have to turn it around. I would have to tell her to turn off her power wheelchair, then put into manual, turn it around, pull it back, and then turn it around. So if anybody can go out there in different counties to make sure that if any sidewalks is slightly up, that they need to be flattened out, how can they make sure what is what and make sure I have the data of it and everything? Because it's that so far they haven't done all of it yet to get it flat, so people in mobility won't have any problems, especially those with mobility issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Garland. Any other comments or? I think that's it. So, hey, we appreciate hearing from you, and we're sorry to hear about your mother, and I think from all of us, sending you our condolences and definitely thinking about you. Anyone
Thanks.
else? Yes, thank you, Garland. John Paul on or nothing? Okay. All right, no other public comment. Moving on to item 9, our next meeting is scheduled for November 21st, 2025. And seeing no other business before the committee, do I have a motion to adjourn? Scott, second? Amy, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, everyone.